The Indian Navy is in crisis, perhaps the biggest crisis, unprecedented. The Admiral D.K. Joshi stepped down, and Shiv Arur and Gaurav Sawant are joining me in the studio. They've been breaking story after story on whether what happened on INS Sindhuratna will ever, unfortunately, God forbid, ever be repeated. But we're talking about perhaps what could be the biggest story related to the INS Sindhuratna accident yet. A senior naval officer who was among the last to speak to Lieutenant Manoranjan Kumar has made an extraordinary revelation. Just days before Lieutenant Kumar set sail for the final time, the two officers shared a conversation. The senior officer tells us that Lieutenant Kumar was worried about the risks he and his crew were taking by sailing with the expired batteries, the very same ones that caused last week's fire. We are protecting this officer's identity.
Disaster struck in the battery compartment of INS Sindhuratna. Barely moments later, 25-year-old Lieutenant Manoranjan Kumar had suffocated to death, sealed into a compartment by the submarine's emergency fire suppression system. But Headlines Today now has explosive proof that the officer knew about the ticking bomb he was sailing in. Four days before his death, Lieutenant Manoranjan Kumar had dinner at the Naval Officers' Mess in Mumbai. In an explosive twist to the tragedy, a serving naval officer who dined with Lieutenant Manoranjan that night has told Headlines Today that the young officer virtually predicted his doom.
Initially, when I spoke to him, this guy he said, I am disembarked from the submarine and I am going on leave shortly. So when I heard about the incident, I narrated this incident to some of the friends. Look, I met this officer who warned me that we are sitting on a bomb, and that's how we are sailing. So I said, there are some people, who's already predicted. But later on I came to know, after 2-3 days, I just happened to see a message that it was Lieutenant Manoranjan. It was terribly shocked to me. Frankly speaking, I was shocked in the sense that why did I have wished him good luck? And I was shocked to have this conversation with him, and I wished that if I could go back in time and just not wish him good luck.
The shock of realization was made worse when Lieutenant Manoranjan Sr. remembered the precise, helpless warning the young officer had made about the Sindhuratna's decrepit state.
So I asked him that after Sindhuratna, has things changed? Has the safety increased? So he happened to tell me, sir, the batteries that we have, they take 10 times longer to charge. And if they take 10 times longer, naturally the hydrogen H2S that is developed is also 10 times. Whereas the hydrogen burners which are there, they are designed to burn up to say max 2 times hydrogen. These 7 times, which is highly inflammable gases, lead to a lot of incidents. In fact, he told me that there are so many incidents that go unreported.
The officer says he has been shattered ever since he heard the news that during one of his last meals on land, Lieutenant Manoranjan had virtually known what was coming.
I didn't sleep for 2 days. I literally, had tears in my eyes. I had this conversation. This guy knew that there's an issue there. Still he went there. He laid his life for the country. So, with that kind of turmoil. Plus, I had the burden of having this conversation with him, wherein he described, sir, we are just, anything can happen anytime.
While protecting the identity of the officer who has chosen to speak out, his words are a shattering indication of sentiments within the Navy over just who should be held responsible.
Some kind of accountability from the people, so-called integrated headquarters, wherein those guys are equally responsible. Ministry of Defense has become integrated headquarters. But unfortunately, they don't share that kind of responsibility if things go wrong. So I think it is a collective responsibility of the people, right from the electrical officer who should have said that, look, this is what it is, you can't say, to the the minister or integrated headquarter which is responsible for supplying these vessels. I think everybody down the chain is responsible.
We're protecting the identity of this serving naval officer who's chosen to speak out to Headlines Today in a confidential email that he's actually sent to his seniors, and which Headlines Today now has an exclusive copy of. He has said that there should be collective responsibility for the death of Lieutenant Manoranjan Kumar on INS Sindhuratna. He says in the email that the officer told him that he was sailing on a bomb. Officers were sailing on bombs as far as the submarine arm was concerned, and that the entire higher military leadership was fully aware of the problems that afflicted the submarine service of the Indian Navy. Further, he said that battery pit fires was simply the order of the day, and that everyone needs to take collective responsibility for Lieutenant Manoranjan's death. The question now really is of accountability, of who truly must take the blame for sending young officers like Lieutenant Manoranjan out to sea, knowing full well it could be their last. In New Delhi, Shiv Arur for Headlines Today.
Story is with us in the studio. Shiv, this is an insider account, explosive. What does the Navy have to say in its defense? What does the Ministry of Defense have to say?
Well, they're completely shocked. I've been getting calls from Navy officers, both in Mumbai and at Naval Headquarters all day to, ask me about, of course, who this officer is. And that, of course, we've not revealed because we're protecting his identity. And B, we've also told the Navy's told us that this could be hearsay from an officer. He's young. He was 25 years old. Let's just remember, Maruk, that he may have been a lieutenant or a lieutenant commander, but he had been to sea many times in these submarines. And as Gaurav will also say, it's the young officers who are actually on the front line, on the very skeletal crew on a submarine, knowing precisely where all the critical areas are, knowing what's happening. It's very crucial. One of the things that's hurt the Navy the most, and I've got tens of calls right through the day saying this boy was absolutely right. When they say that we've got no choice. I mean, what choice do we have? It's all very well to say, people should speak out, people should flag up the problems. But when you're up against the establishment, when you have no choice but, to go out to sea, and follow your leader, your commanding officer is like your God. If he says, we've got to go out to sea today, we've got to go out to sea. So the real commentary in this story, and something that's shattered the Navy and the Ministry of Defense, is the fact that there are young officers like this who are fully aware of what's really wrong, but they are completely incapacitated by the system to actually do anything about it. That's the real peril here.
Gaurav, we've been hearing these comments that are coming from the Navy, statements, press releases. They seem to be scurrying around for answers. And now they have a system in place. Is it a measure which is too little too late?
Well, a measure has been put in place more as a morale booster, because more for families of sailors and officers than for the soldiers themselves, so that families know the Navy is doing something about this. Having a security audit is always a good thing. What the Navy has immediately done is to order a stand down. A stand down means no ship will sail. Most of the ships have anyway come back from an exercise. So there will be a safety audit on board all ships, all submarines, all aircraft that the Indian Navy has in its inventory, and then a rear admiral rank officer will have to sign off on all safety. The moment they say yes, only then will these ships go out and sail again. There's one lesson that's come out of Admiral Joshi's resignation. No longer is the Navy willing to be the fall guy. In case there is something that's missing, they're going to raise it to the level of the Ministry of Defense. So far, all 9 of the Kilo class submarines are not seaworthy. Most of them, their shelf life is over, their 25-year life is over, their life cycle is over, yet they're floating, yet they're sailing. Why? Because there isn't a replacement. Now, because there isn't a replacement, because the government goofed up on the purchase of Scorpion submarines or whatever is the way forward, you are literally, like MiG-21s were called, flying coffins. These are like floating coffins, and that's the disaster in defense management and defense procurement today.
And while we are talking about this, the question that has been raised ever since Admiral D.K. Joshi resigned is the question about where does the responsibility really lie? Does it only lie with the Naval Admiral, or does it lie with the Defense Minister, A.K. Antony? The question now being raised, with the chorus growing, is should A.K. Antony also step down?
मेरे घर का सहारा छीना गया, सरकार अब क्या करेगा मेरे को? देगा बेटा वापस?
Her questions to the officers who brought her 26-year-old son's body home are met with silence. Silence that echoes all the way from Jamshedpur to the national capital.
गवर्नमेंट की नेग्लिजेंसी है जो उस पर देखा नहीं गया। डिफेंस मंत्रालय की वो है, हादसा हो गया, उन्होंने वर्ड में अपना इस्तीफा 2 लाइन लिख के दे दिया। डिफेंस मिनिस्टर को भी तो करना चाहिए ना इसको।
Preliminary inquiries by the Board of Inquiry into the INS Sindhuratna accident have found that it may not have been the batteries that were responsible for the fire, but cables leading out from the battery pit area in a compartment right below where the sailors actually stayed on the submarine. However, as a precautionary measure, and given that these are still preliminary investigations into the tragedy, the batteries on board INS Sindhuratna have all been removed and replaced with batteries from a sister submarine, INS Sindhukesri, at this time.
Experts who've been part of the Navy agree that accountability must be fixed at the top.
Who's going to investigate the circumstances that led the Navy chief to hand in his resignation? I mean, he didn't hand in his resignation only because of the Sindhuratna. Certainly the Sindhuratna would have forced his hand, the loss of those 2 lives. But his cry was a cry of despair that he's unable to maintain the Navy to the standards to which he expects of his juniors.
Whose job is this? The Navy chief has resigned, that's fine. He has owned up moral responsibility. But what about the responsibility of the Ministry of Defence?
Moments after headlines today aired the report, the pressure started building on the Defence Minister, explaining perhaps Mr. Anthony's reticence today.
अगर मैं सरकार से मांगूं कि मेरे को कुछ चाहिए तो मेरा बेटा चाहिए, क्या देगा बदले में? बताइए, आप देंगे?
A soldier's son who became an officer died a martyr, a victim not of a foreign enemy but the enemy within. With Shivarur in New Delhi, Pierre Pitter, headlines today.
I want to ask a question. When Admiral D.K. Joshi resigned, there was a chorus that A.K. Antony should step down. And now there seems to be a concerted effort to put the blame on the Navy and the Ministry of Defence be left out of the loop. Gaurav.
Well, the Navy is very clear. As far as the batteries are concerned, they had raised this issue 2.5 years ago with the Ministry of Defence. The responsibility for the purchase of batteries, and this isn't just about 240 batteries on one submarine. These submarines undergo a refit, and whenever they go, Navy orders batteries not for one submarine but for 3, and with their reserves. There is something called war wastage reserve. So the Navy wants everything in one go. It's just 11 crores per battery set. So the money is not too much, but when all of this adds up, it is more than the budget of the Navy. It has to be signed off by the Defence Secretary. But this matter has been hanging fire for 2.5 years. Now, who's responsible for this? Is it D.K. Joshi? Well, morally, yes. But who signs the dotted line? It's the Defence Secretary. Who supervises? It's the Defence Minister. And they need to answer, and they are curiously silent on this.
11 crores versus the lives of our sailors. And Shiv, at this point, as far as the Ministry of Defence is concerned, and the soundbite of the mother of Lieutenant Manoranjan Kumar keeps coming back to me, where she says that when will this man be held accountable, the man who's at the helm of affairs, and we've heard nothing from him, absolutely silence.
Yeah. He's decided not to engage at all, on this issue. Today, when our reporters tried to get a comment from him, he hopped into his car and just sped away. He refused to comment on it because I think there's even in the body language of A.K. Antony Maruk, you can see a level of nervousness. He's usually a minister, even though he's very obsessed with his image. If you go up to him for a response, he's not the kind of person who runs away. He doesn't get into a car and run away. This time, we're told by our sources, he's actually embarrassed about what's happening because the questions are very personal this time. The trauma that the Navy is going through right now is something that is singeing South Block. You can feel the bureaucracy, experiencing the anger of thousands of Navy personnel across the country who are, making their sentiments felt. We had a serving officer, for God's sake, who actually decided to speak in the mainstream media, even though we protected his identity. That's something you don't see very often. And that gives you a sense of just how angry people are. And I think A.K. Antony has realized just how angry the Navy is about
but honestly,
him not
Shiv
taking
and
responsibility.
Gaurav, his embarrassment is not going to be enough.
No.
And clearly, there has to be some accountability at the end of the day. But Shiv Arur and Gaurav Sawant for joining me with your perspective, and of course for breaking news first here on Headlines Today. Thank you so much.